On June 19th, 2026, a young woman posted a series of pictures on Instagram. It was her 20th birthday. The photos showed a luxury resort in Mahabaleshwar, a rental convertible overflowing with fresh roses, and a diamond ring catching the sunlight. In every frame, she was smiling. But less than 24 hours before those photos went live, a 26-year-old man named Ketan Agarwal was falling through the monsoon mist of the Western Ghats, 350 feet down, straight into a jagged rocky abyss. When the local search teams finally reached his body through the torrential rain, his fiancée Sia was screaming at the top of the cliff. She told the police it was a tragic, horrible slip, a freak accident on a wet mountain trail. And looking at her tear-stained face, looking at the treacherous terrain of Lohagad Fort, the police believed her. But they didn't know about the passport. They didn't know about the snake. And they certainly didn't know about the shadow in the heavy hoodie who had been silently tracking them up the mountain. To understand why Ketan Agarwal died on that mountain, you have to understand the world he built for the woman who allegedly pushed him. Ketan wasn't just anyone, he was the only son of Vishal Agarwal, one of Maharashtra's most powerful real estate tycoons. He was brilliant, humble, and completely devoted to his family. After finishing his master's degree in entrepreneurship in Boston, he returned to India in 2023 to step up as the director of his father's empire. He had the world at his feet. So when his family arranged a marriage alliance with the Goyals, a highly respected business family they had known for 35 years, Chetan didn't just accept it. He went all in. He didn't just plan a wedding, he planned a fairy tale. A 17-crore palace booked in Udaipur, private chartered flights locked in to fly their guests across the country. Chetan looked at Sia Goyal and saw his future. But if you look closely at the footage from their engagement party in February 2026, something invisible is happening. Chetan was a romantic, but he wasn't blind. Over the next few months, he began noticing small, unsettling glitches in their relationship. Whenever they were together, Shia's mind seemed a million miles away. Her eyes were permanently locked onto her phone screen. When Chetan would gently ask her why she was so emotionally distant, the response was always the same. She would instantly pivot. A sudden burst of affection, sweet words, a sudden wave of attention. In psychology, they call this love bombing, a tactical distraction to keep someone from looking too closely at the cracks in the foundation. Chetan mentioned it to his father. He mentioned it to his friends. Everyone told him the same thing. She's only 20. She's just nervous about marrying into a massive family. Chetan chose to trust the woman he loved. He chose to believe her sweetness. What he didn't realize was that every time Sia smiled at him, she was calculating the exact weight of his body and the depth of a cliff. By May 2026, the countdown to the grand November wedding was officially on. The invitations were being drafted, the catering menus finalized, but behind closed doors, Sia Goyal was panicking. According to statements later given by her relatives, Shia began dropping hints. She told family members she wasn't mentally prepared. She begged to postpone the wedding by a year. In the world of arranged marriages, this is often written off as cold feet. It's terrifying to merge your life with a new family, especially one as monumentally wealthy as the Agarwals. If Shia had simply sat her parents down and said, "I cannot do this," the engagement would have shattered, reputations would have been bruised, but everyone would still be alive. But Sia wasn't just hiding pre-wedding anxiety, she was hiding a massive, dark secret. Remember how Chetan noticed Sia was always buried in her phone? He thought she was scrolling through social media or texting friends. She wasn't. When the police later pulled her itemized call records, they discovered a terrifying digital footprint. From the exact week of her engagement to Chetan in February, all the way through June, Sia's phone had connected to one specific number over 2,000 times. They had logged more than 230 hours of private conversations. That number belonged to a 22-year-old man named Chetan Chaudhary. Chetan wasn't a stranger. His family ran a dry fruit and spice business in the exact same commercial circle as Sia's father. They had met during a Diwali business community mixer in late 2025, and the attraction had been instantaneous. They were young, they were in love, and they were entirely operating in the shadows. This is where the psychology of this case turns deeply disturbing. Shia didn't want Chetan. She wanted Chetan, but she was terrified of the societal shame and parental fury that would come with breaking off an alliance with Maharashtra's biggest real estate empire. So she came up with a twisted equation. If she called off the wedding, she was the villain. But if Ketan tragically died, she was the grieving, innocent victim. She could inherit the sympathy of both families, wait out a respectful period of mourning, and eventually slide right into the arms of her true lover. She decided that Ketan Agarwal had to disappear, and her planning didn't start in June. On May 31st, 2026, Sia asked Chetan to take her on a romantic day trip to Lohagad Fort. The monsoon rains were just beginning to slick the steep rock faces. Chetan thought it was a beautiful, spontaneous date. He took photos of her smiling against the misty backdrop. He had absolutely no idea that Sia wasn't looking at the scenery. She was scouting, testing the cellular reception, checking the height of the ledges, and mapping out the blind spots where the security guards never walked. She was designing an execution chamber out of an ancient fortress. Once the location was locked in, she knew she had to act fast. The wedding date was aggressively moving closer, but on June 6th, her timeline hit a massive roadblock. Chetan, ever the adoring fiancé, surprised her with an all-expenses-paid, luxury pre-wedding photo shoot trip to Bali, Indonesia. Two of their close friends were coming along. It was meant to be a week of pure romance, far away from the stress of wedding planning. Inside, Sia was furious. If they left the country, her carefully plotted accident at Lohagad Fort would be delayed, or worse, ruined. On the evening of June 6th, the group arrived at the international airport. They lined up at the check-in counter. Chetan unzipped the main travel bag, the bag that held all of their cash, credit cards, and travel documents. He reached inside. His heart dropped. His passport was completely gone. It made absolutely no sense. All the cash was untouched. Every single credit card was exactly where it belonged. The friends' passports were there. Shia's passport was there. Only Ketan's was missing. Think about it. If a baggage handler or a thief had slipped their hand into that bag, they would have grabbed the cash. A missing passport with 0 stolen wealth points to only one thing: deliberate, targeted sabotage. She put on a masterclass in manipulation. She acted completely shocked, consoling a deeply stressed Ketan, and smoothly suggested they pivot and do a local photo shoot instead. She successfully diverted everyone's attention away from the glaring anomaly of the missing passport. Why? Because she needed Ketan's feet firmly planted on Indian soil. She needed him near the mountain. Just 8 days later, on June 14th, Shia enacted her first strike. She used her preset narrative, telling Ketan that Lohagad Fort held a deep, sentimental, romantic value for her, and begged him to go back up the trail. As they walked along a deserted, precipitous cliffside, Sia waited until Chetan turned his back to look at the valley. She stepped up behind him, put her hands on his shoulders, and threw her entire body weight forward. Chetan went over the edge, but gravity didn't win that day. As Chetan fell, his hands desperately flailed and caught hold of a thick, low-hanging tree branch growing out of the cliffside. Gasping for air, scraping his hands raw, he managed to haul himself back up onto the safety of the trail. He turned around, terrified, looking at his fiancée. This was the moment the entire plot should have collapsed, but Sia didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around him, hyperventilating, crying tears of absolute relief. Through her faked panic, she spun a brilliant lie. A massive snake was slithering out of the brush right behind you. It was about to strike your leg. I panicked. I tried to push you out of the way of the venom. Chetan looked at her wide, innocent eyes. He loved her. He trusted her completely. He didn't ask a single follow-up question. Instead, he hugged her tightly, kissing her forehead, and thanked her for saving his life. He didn't realize he had just survived a dress rehearsal. The snake story had worked, but it had left a terrible psychological scar on Chetan. He was openly terrified of returning to Lohagad Fort. He explicitly told his friends he never wanted to go back to that mountain, but he made a fatal mistake. He didn't tell his parents. He knew his father was already incredibly stressed about the airport passport investigation, and Ketan didn't want to worry his family with a story about a wild reptile. She knew her window of opportunity was shutting down. She needed an airtight excuse to drag him back up those slippery rocks one last time. That excuse arrived on June 19th, her 20th birthday. Chetan spent a fortune making her feel like a queen. He rented a beautiful convertible, filled it with hundreds of imported roses, and threw an intimate dinner party where he went down on one knee to give her a custom birthday gift. Then came the trap. She looked at him and said, "For my birthday wish, I want to watch the sunrise with you at the highest point of Lohagad Fort." Ketan vehemently refused. He reminded her of how dangerous it was, how much the monsoon mud had worsened in 5 days. But Sia didn't back down. She went over his head, calling Ketan's mother directly, weeping over the phone, asking her to convince Ketan to grant her this one simple birthday wish. Ketan's mother, thinking it was just a romantic whim, told her son to go. Yielding to the heavy pressure, Ketan gave in. But this time, Sia wasn't going to rely on a tree branch staying out of the way. She brought backup. 24 hours before the climb, a hidden security camera inside a quiet Pune cafe captured Sia and Chetan sitting at a corner table. In the blurry footage, they aren't arguing. They are laughing. They are leaning in close, finalizing details. The next morning, as Ketan and Sia began their trek up the steep fort steps, Chetan was right behind them. But his behavior was highly unusual for a standard tourist. First, despite the intense summer humidity and heat, Chetan was wearing a massive, thick winter hoodie with the drawstrings pulled tight to obscure his face from the fort's entry cameras. Second, he deliberately bypassed the mandatory security ticket counter. He pulled a guard aside and lied smoothly, claiming he wasn't tracking to the top, but was just an athlete doing a high-intensity trail run along the base. The guard let him slip through. Chetan moved like a ghost through the trees, keeping a precise distance, watching the bright jackets of Sia and Ketan move higher and higher up the mountain. At approximately 3 p.m., the couple reached the northernmost edge of the fort, a spectacular, terrifying rock formation known as Vinchu Khada. The ridge is incredibly narrow, dropping off vertically on both sides into a 350-foot gorge. The monsoon fog had rolled in thick, completely wiping out visibility. There were no other trekkers in sight. Ketan walked out onto the ridge, completely mesmerized by the sea of clouds below him. Behind him, the shadow in the hoodie emerged from the mist. There was no argument, there was no warning. Together, operating with cold, synchronized precision, Sia and Chetan stepped up behind Ketan Agarwal and unleashed a violent, coordinated push. Ketan didn't find a branch this time. He vanished into the white fog. The second Ketan cleared the ledge, Chetan turned around and sprinted down the mountain, disappearing into the heavy forest tracks. Minutes later, the quiet mountain air was shattered by Sia's blood-curdling screams. She ran down to the local villagers, weeping hysterically, pulling at her hair, screaming that her beautiful fiancé had lost his balance while trying to take a panoramic photograph. Local search and rescue teams spent hours fighting the blinding rain before they finally hauled Ketan's broken body out of the valley. At the hospital, he was officially pronounced dead. The initial police report listed the cause of death as an accidental monsoon slip. It was a tragic, common occurrence at Lohagad Fort. Sia had won. The next morning, she went back on Instagram, posting heartbreaking black and white photos of Ketan, typing out long, poetic paragraphs about how her heart was permanently broken. She sat in the Agarwal family home, holding Ketan's weeping mother, crying right alongside her. But Sia made one massive, catastrophic miscalculation. She assumed a billionaire real estate mogul who built an empire from nothing would be easily blinded by tears. Vishal Agarwal was completely broken by the loss of his only son, but his sharp mind didn't stop working. He knew Ketan wasn't a clumsy tourist. He was a highly disciplined, highly experienced trekker who had climbed far tougher terrain in the United States. A casual slip on a path he had already walked twice made 0 sense. Then Ketan's grieving friends broke their silence. They told Vishal about the bizarre snake incident on June 14th. The dots instantly connected in Vishal's mind. The missing passport, the sudden obsession with the fort, the snake, the fatal fall. He went directly to the superintendent of police and demanded a formal deep-dive homicide investigation. When the cybercrime unit pulled Sia's phone, the facade evaporated within seconds. They didn't just find the 2,000 calls to Chetan Chaudhary. They found the cafe CCTV footage. They went back to the fort's security cameras and spotted the bizarre individual in the heavy hoodie. When they mapped Chetan's personal cell phone tower pings, they discovered another massive red flag. His phone had been left active at his office in Pune, completely static, while his physical body was caught on camera miles away at the mountain. It was undeniable proof of premeditation. They knew about digital footprints, but they didn't know about physical surveillance. On June 23, 2026, the police intercept teams moved in. Goyal and Chetan Chaudhary were arrested and brought into separate interrogation rooms. Cracked under the weight of the digital evidence, both suspects broke down and confessed to everything. She coldly admitted that she chose murder over a difficult conversation because she couldn't face the societal awkwardness of breaking her family's business alliance. Today, both individuals sit in cold jail cells, awaiting a trial where the prosecution is aggressively pursuing the maximum sentence. This case leaves behind a haunting question that digital forensics can never truly answer. How does a normal, highly educated, privileged 20-year-old girl look at a man who loved her enough to build a 17 crore paradise for her and decide that his entire existence is worth less than a minor, uncomfortable conversation with her parents? Ketan Agarwal thought he was climbing a mountain to build a memory with his future wife. In reality, he was walking hand in hand with his executioner. Ketan Agarwal's story is a terrifying reminder that sometimes the biggest threat isn't a stranger in the dark, it's the person sitting right next to you. The trial is currently underway, and we will keep you updated as the final verdict drops. What do you think is the most chilling detail of this case? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to make sure stories like Ketan's are never forgotten, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't skip the next video on your screen. It dives into another mystery you won't believe is real. Until next time, watch who you trust.